I'm not the sound check guy. I'm just the talking head guy. Well, this morning we have Brother Shane Scott, applicant for pastor here at Reavisville. He's going to bring the word this morning, so let's give him a welcome. Scott.
Good morning. I'm glad my mic is working. It's always a great day to be in the house of the Lord. If y'all want to, turn to Genesis. You don't have to go too far. Genesis chapter 39. How many of y'all like awkward silence? If I ask a question, it's going to be awkward. Nobody answers. So one of the questions I want to ask you, what is a great compliment you can give somebody? So it's going to be awkward.
Good looking.
Good looking. What else? What is a great compliment you can give somebody?
Good smelling.
Good smelling. Good job. And now there's lots of compliments you can give. Some of the ones I've written down, they say, you are very talented. We tell people who play sports, you're a very talented player. You are very successful. You're a good person. You are a hard worker. A lot of times when we hear stuff like that, it makes us feel good. Somebody recognizes. But there is one compliment that I think is the greatest one of all. And it is the one that I can see God in your life. Just think about that. Think about when you go through your life. Are you portraying God through your life? And that's what Genesis 39 tells us. Joseph is one of my favorite stories. Every time I read it, God reveals something to me. I have another sermon pretty much on the exact same patches. And I can read it again and have another sermon. And I have preached from this chapter, I ain't tell you how many times, and every sermon has been different. And this last time I was reading it, God just gave me this soul-searching question. Is God with me? And that's the question I want to ask y'all. Is God with you? Not that if God is this, or if He's beside you, but does your life show that God is with you? Just like it did with Joseph. So, that's what I want us to look at. Joseph's life, give a little backstory on Joseph. His life wasn't easy. Joseph went from the favorite son. His brothers hated him. They tricked him. They threw him into a pit. They sold him to slavers, and he went off to Egypt. Then he was thrown in prison for being completely innocent. Joseph had every right to be bitter. He had every right to be angry, but he never did. There was one phrase that kept repeating: the Lord was with Joseph. And a lot of times when I read something in the Bible, when I see a phrase over and over and over again, it makes me wonder, what is God trying to say to me? Just like parents, when we tell our kids something over and over, they should listen to us, everything we say. But a lot of times they don't. So the things that are really important, we say over and over again. Everything that is in this book, we should listen to. We should pay attention to it. But just like kids, we don't always pay attention. So when I see these phrases that God puts in there over and over again, it's something that I really think God is really trying to drive home to us. And it's that phrase that the Lord was with Joseph. So my passage is going to be Genesis 39. It's going to be 1 through 23, but I'm not going to read all of it. I'm only going to read 1 through 4, then I'm going to skip down to 20 through 23. So in Genesis 39, verse 1, it said, Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, brought him from the Ishmaelites, who had taken him down there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he was a successful man, and he was in the house of the master of the Egyptian. And the master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all that he did to prosper in his hand. So Joseph found favor in his sight and served him. Then he made him over the seal of the house and all things that was put under his authority. And verse 20. Then Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, a place where the king prisoners was confined. And he was there in prison, but the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners who was in the prison. And whatever they did there, it was his doing. The keeper of the prison did not look into anything that was under Joseph's authority because the Lord was with him. And whatever he did, the Lord made it prosper. So one thing that I took away from this passage is that our circumstances, we can't control our circumstances. We can't control what storms or what troubles come into our life. The one thing we can control is, do we still follow God? Do we still follow the path that he laid out for us? And that's the first thing that, that came out to me, that God's presence is more important than our position. God's presence is more important than where we are located at. So, Joseph, he had gone, like I said, from the favorite son. He went from being the favorite to being a slave. He went from having everything that he wanted to being a servant. So, he once had the coat of many colors, but now he was in chains. He once lived in a father's house, but now he lives in a foreign land. His position changed. But one thing didn't change, that God was still with him. The Lord was with Joseph. So God did not change. So hear that phrase, the Lord is with Joseph, and we read it. I think I read it 3 or 4 times in just a few verses. Joseph lost his position, but God was still with him. So, a lot of time our cultural measures success by how much money we have, how big of a house, how talented you are, what type of car you drive, who you dating, all these things that it really doesn't matter. The thing that matters is what God measures us. God doesn't measure our worth the way that the world measures it. You can have a high position and be spiritually empty. You can have very little and still walk closely with God. Moses understood this. When Moses was leading the Israelites out of Egypt and they was in the wilderness, he told God, I'd rather be in the wilderness with you than be in the promised land without you. Moses knew that the presence of God was a whole lot more than where they were going to be. Even though the promised land was what God promised them, he'd rather be lost in the wilderness because God was there. He'd rather be in his presence. We should have the same attitude. Everything we do, we should have that attitude. I'd rather have God's presence in the valley than on the mountain with success. I'd rather have God at my lowest point than be without him at my highest point. And that's what Moses is saying. And that's what, I believe that God is trying to tell us in this passage. So, ask yourself, is God with you when you're at work? Is God with you when you're at home, when you're alone, when you're under pressure? Is God with you when nobody else is watching? Do your life still reflect God in your private life? I can lose my job. I can lose my money. I can lose my possessions. I can lose my popularity. But I will never lose the presence of God. He will always be there. So even though you lose everything else, do not lose your walk with God. Always keep your eyes focused on him. And the second thing that God revealed to me was that God's presence should produce a visible difference in our lives. Something, fascinating happened in Joseph's life. Potiphar, which I love this. Potiphar is an Egyptian. So he's not Joseph's dad. He is not Joseph's friend. He's not his family. He's not his pastor. But yet, what did it say Potiphar said? Potiphar is an Egyptian, but he said that God was with Joseph. He didn't say that one of the Egyptian gods was with him. He didn't say that Ra or Apophis or Anubis. He didn't say any of them. He could recognize the true living God through Joseph by how? By simply the way he was walking his life, the way he was living. So Potiphar noticed. He noticed something different about him. He said, and his master saw that the Lord was with him. Joseph didn't have to go around, walking around and say, hey, I follow the one true living God. I follow the great I am. My God is Yahweh. Joseph didn't have to say any of that. He just simply walked the path that God laid out before him. And everybody around him noticed it. Potiphar noticed that something was different about him. I'll tell you a story. When I was in the 8th grade, we had a boy. I can't remember where he came from. He stayed with us for a year. And we was out there, we was playing basketball, and we was doing warm-ups, and we were doing layups. And it's been 3 or 4 months since he's been there. And he was in front of me in the line. He just turned around. He said, "What's different about you?" And I just kind of looked at him like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "You ain't like none of our other friends." And I kind of thought about it for a second. He went and done his layup. I went and done my layup. And I got back behind him again. He turned around and said, "So what is it?" Took me a second to realize what he meant. A lot of my friends in school, they done worldly things. I was still friends with them, even though I didn't do those things. They respected me enough not to do those things around me. And that's what he was wanting to know. He's like, "Why do they not do that stuff around you?" Now I finally realized it's because of the way I was living my life. I was living my life the way that God was wanting me to live. And it was reflecting people around me that I didn't even know. I didn't know that's what I was doing. And yet that's what Joseph was here doing. He was just simply living his life, walking God's path. And yet people noticed it. Because, sometimes we can talk about faith more than we live by faith. The old saying, actions speak louder than words. We can wear the t-shirt that, said Jesus saved. We can bring our Bible. We can sing songs. But if we walk out that door and nothing changed, then are we truly walking with God? Are we truly following his path? Can people see Jesus in my life on Monday morning like they do here on Sunday afternoons? When we do this, the presence of God should affect how we speak. It should affect the way we work. It should affect how we treat one another. How we respond to anger or to criticism. Someone who hurts us. Used to, when I was a kid, if somebody made me mad, I got even. That was just me. If somebody made me mad, I'm going to make sure they got mad back. If somebody hurt me, I was going to hurt them back. That was just me being a kid. But now somebody can say something so hurtful to me, and I just have nothing but love for them. And it's just amazing how when you dedicate and renew your mind to follow God's path and you walk with him daily, how much it changes your life. And when you do that walk, it should produce that visible effect where other people can see it. Sitting here in Sunday school, the first verse that he wrote on the board was Matthew 5:16. And I just couldn't help but smile because that was one of the verses I've written down. It said, "Let your light shine before men, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven." Notice the purpose of this verse. It's not, let me go out and do good works so you can tell me I did a good job. It's not for me to go out and do good works so I can do something to help benefit me. It's for me to go out and do good works to glorify God, to glorify the Father in heaven, to build up his kingdom, not mine. If you go outside in the nighttime and you see the moon, the moon got this light. But if the moon don't produce no light, it reflects the sun. That's the way our life should be. We cannot produce God's glory, but we can reflect it. We can let it shine through us. So, when people sees us refuse to compromise our convictions, they should see Christ. When people see peace in the middle of difficulty, they should see Christ. When people see us forgiving people, they should see Christ. And when they see us that we are patient and kind and loving, they should see Christ in our lives. We should have that daily walk. So, ask yourself, when people are watching you, what do they see? Do they see anger or grace? Do they see bitterness or forgiveness? Do they see complaining or gratitude, fear or faith? Do they see pride or humility? Do they see that you're being selfish or do they see that you're actually being loved? If I claim that Christ in me, then that's better what people should see. If Christ truly lives in me, if I am walking Christ's path, then my actions, my words, my reflect should be reflecting God's glory. And that's what Joseph was doing. He was walking God's path. He didn't have to go out and claim it to the world. He did simply live the life that God was wanting him to live. And yet people saw it. And the third thing, it said walking with God means honoring him in every step. 7 through 12, it talks about when Joseph was tempted. Joseph's faith wasn't just visible when everything was going well. Potiphar just didn't notice Joseph's faith because he was doing the hard work. Joseph's faith became visible even when he was tempted by Potiphar's wife. So even Potiphar's wife was trying to tempt him, Joseph still stayed true to his faith. Joseph could have thought that nobody would know. He could have thought that I'm far from home. He could have said that God seemed to have forgotten me anyway. He could have thought, I already suffered enough. Let me give in to this temptation. But yet, in verse 9, it gives us an answer. And Joseph said, how then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? Notice what Joseph said. He did not simply say, how is this going to affect my life? How is this going to affect my career? What happens if Potiphar finds out? What if I get caught? None of that was on Joseph's mind. His greatest concern was, how can I sin against God? So we should honor God in every step, in everything we do. Joseph has already made the decision that what he was going to do before temptation arrived. Character is built well before that temptation gets there. If you send out a cashier at a restaurant and they give you too much change back, you already have made up your mind, hey, you gave me too much back. Because all the decisions that you made in your life before then has already built that character. So, Joseph, he already made these small steps. He already made these decisions throughout his life that he's going to follow God no matter what. So when that temptation was there, first thing he said, how can I sin against God? Anything else wasn't even a question to him. That's why walking with God is so important in everyday decisions that we do. Not just here on Sundays, not just when you're in this building or when you're around other church family members. It's every day. It's around your coworkers. It's around your friends that you goof off with. In Micah chapter 6, verse 8, it said, what does your God require of you except to do justice, love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God? That's all that God requires of you. It ain't saying that you got to go out and do these 100 things. It just simply said, walk humbly with your God. And I want you to think about that for a second. Think about the steps that you take during your life. An average person walks about 75,000 miles during their lifetime. Every step when you get out of the bed, you go to the bathroom, you go get coffee or tea, you get your kids up, you get them dressed, you get them ready to go to school, you get ready to go to work. You go to work and you have all your people, everything you do, you come home. All those steps was you honoring God in those moments. Sophie, my daughter, she is 16 months. And already she knows my routine when I come home. I come home and I usually got like fuel or grease, all this stuff on me. So first thing I do, I come home, I take my shoes off. Then when I take my clothes off, and I go take a bath to get all that stuff off of me. Sophie's already figured that out. She would meet me at the door and she would pull out the kitchen chair where I sat at. I would take my shoes. She would point to my shoes. Tell me, take my shoes off. Then she would take me to the bathroom. She knows my routine. At 16 months, she already knows what I'm doing. Is the rest of my steps showing her what living for God really means? She's already picking up on everything that I do. She mimics me. She mocks me. Everything I do. The way I walk. The way I have fun with her. She mimics. Am I showing her what God wants her to do? Are you showing your kids what God wants you to do? With every step, with every word that you say, with every relationship. When I was a kid, my parents always hated when me and my brother came into the house because we never took our shoes off. And usually we was in the mud. So my mom, she could tell exactly when we came into the house, where we went to, and what we did. because she could see our footprint. She's like, well, at least you washed your hands because you went to the sink. Then you went to the refrigerator, probably got a drink, and we went straight back outside. My mom could tell us exactly what we did just by muddy footprints. And I'm pretty sure y'all got kids and grandkids. Y'all probably had the same thing at one time or another. We leave footprints in this world when we walk our spiritual life. So the question is, when somebody's looking at your trail, where are you leading them? Are you leading them to worldly things? Are you leading them to sin, to corruption? Are you leading them to a life to follow Jesus? Where does your footprints lead them? For instance, like I said, Sophie's already picking up on everything I do. So, I always ask myself, my spiritual footprints, she may not hear every sermon that I have, but she will see the way I live my life. So she's going to see how I treat her wife. Is she going to see how I treat her? Is she going to see how I talk to other people? She's going to see how I get frustrated when something go bad. Is she going to see me praying for food? Is she going to see me go up to people and pray for them in need? When somebody in need, where she see me pull out money for them and give it to them to help them? Is my life, am I honoring God with every step, with every word, with every action, with every relationship? Is people are watching you, whether you know it or not. When I was younger, I had 5 close friends, 5 brothers, pretty much. We was inseparable. 2 of them was like me, they grew up in church. The other ones didn't. For the longest, I did not understand why they loved coming to my house, which I was fine with that. I had the 4-wheelers, I had the 3-wheelers. Y'all want to come? We go out mud riding. I'm fine, y'all coming over here. And then one day, we was already graduating high school. I think I was probably 25 or 26 at the time. And one of them told me, why he brought it up, I don't know. He's like, we used to go to your house all the time, swim, ride for all that. He's like, I miss those days. And I'm like, yeah, there was something. He's like, it wasn't the activities I missed. He said it was your dad. And I said, why did you miss my dad? He said, because that was the only godly figure that I had in my life. My dad was not his father, but he looked up to my dad. And that's what I was thinking at that moment. All the people that God placed in my life, how many of them I looked up to, that they wasn't my family members. And that's what how many of them knew that I looked up to them. So all the kids that was running around a while ago, how many other people beside that family do they look up to? They look up to each and every one of you because they know you. They see what you do. So does your footprints point them to God? The 4th thing is that God's presence can make you a blessing to others. In Genesis 39:4, it said Joseph found favor in his sight and served him. Then made him overseer of his house. And when he did that, God blessed him. And he blessed the house of Potiphar. So Joseph's faithfulness didn't just bless him. It blessed the others around him. Just like I said, with that kid that transferred to high school, me simply living my life blessed that kid. He saw something in my life. One of my best friends, my father, blessed him by simply just living the way he was supposed to live. Our actions speak so much louder than anything that we can tell. He simply lived faithfully where God had placed him, and people noticed. That's what Joseph did. That's all that Joseph did. He just simply lived the life that God told him to live. Sometimes, your greatest sermon isn't the one you preach from a pulpit. It ain't going to be the greatest Sunday school lesson that you give. It is simply your life, your testimony, your walk with God. So how you live at home when people is watching you, that's what's going to show people who you really are. It's going to have that question, is God with you? Does your life produce God glory? Because they're going to remember when they see dad praying for somebody else. They're going to remember when mom was talking to other people and asking forgiveness. And they're also going to remember when you're angry, when you're mad. So what does your footprints, what does your life give off? If I go and I ask your kids, who do you learn God from? Who do you learn about Jesus from? Are they going to be able to say mom and dad? Are they going to be able to say grandma or granddad? Or did you push that off onto somebody else to teach them? Is God with you? Someone is learning what Christianity looks like by simply just watching your life. God's presence doesn't mean a problem-free life. Joseph had a terrible, terrible life. He lost everything that he knew and loved. But yet one thing remained. God was with him. And it didn't say that, if you resist temptation, if you honor God, if you maintain your integrity, it doesn't mean that God's going to give you an easy life. Those storms are still going to come. Joseph, he was still sold in slavery. He was still sent to prison. But Joseph obeyed God when things got worse. Sometimes we think, if I'm following God, everything should work out. I used to be that way when I was younger. And I got mad when stuff didn't go my way. I was there doing everything right, and it didn't seem like it going right. But doing the right thing doesn't guarantee the easy life. Only thing that guarantees is when you walk through a storm, God is going to meet you in it. Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, they knew what was coming. They knew if they did not fall down to King Nebuchadnezzar, they were going to be put to the furnace. But yet they chose to follow God. They chose to listen to him rather than man, and Jesus met them in the fire. So what does your walk tell people? Does your life produce God's glory? So the greatest evidence that we can do that with God's presence is, does Christ live with us? There's a lot of similarities between Joseph and Jesus. Joseph's story ultimately points to Jesus. Joseph was rejected by his brother. He was sold for silver, and he suffered when he done nothing wrong. But eventually he was lifted from a place of humiliation. He was lifted and placed above all of Egypt. But yet here comes Jesus. He was rejected by his own. He was betrayed by silver. He suffered even though he was completely innocent. And Jesus raised from the grave to be a king. Joseph became a blessing to many. But yet through Jesus, the whole world was blessed. Through Jesus, we have that walk. Through Jesus, we have that ability to have a relationship with God. Through that doorway. And Jesus simply says, if you love me, then obey me. Is God with you? It's a simple question, but it's a deep, soul-searching question. Does my life, does it truly represent Christ? Can people really look at me and say, I see Christ in your life? It is a soul-searching question, but it's a very important one. So the great question isn't, do I go to church? It isn't if I sing. It's not if I read my Bible daily. All those is just making a check mark, saying, I done it, I done it, I done it. The greatest question is, if I look at you, can I see Christ in your life? Do you have that personal relationship with Christ? It's all about surrendering your life to Him. It begins with salvation, it continues with surrender, and it becomes visible through our daily lives. As we get ready for invitation, it tells, this chapter tells us something much deeper than just Joseph's life. It tells us about the Lord is with Joseph. The same God that was with him. The same God that was with Moses. The same God that was with David and King Solomon, he came to this earth because he wanted to renew a relationship. He wanted to have this walk with his Father. His name was Jesus. And he gave us that relationship back. He gave us the opportunity to have this walk with God. So I'll tell you something. Years ago, I was in the court, standing before the judge, and I was sentenced. I was sentenced to life imprisonment. That was me. Most of y'all look at me like, man, why am I standing here? Well, because the judge's son stood up. He spoke on my behalf. And he took my punishment for me. That's how we stand before God. We stand before God condemned. We stand before him deserving whatever punishment he gives us. But yet his son stood up, spoke on our behalf, and took our punishment. 75,000 miles. And he took every punishment, everything that we deserved in those steps. So if you are truly saying that I'm a Christian, that I love God, I follow God, are you truly walking those miles with him? Are you truly walking every step, with every word, with every relationship, with every consequence that you have? Are you truly following God? So I got 3 questions that I want to just leave you with. The first one is God with you? Are you saved? Do you have that relationship with him? Have you surrendered your life to him? The second question, can people see God in me? Can they see Christ? Can they see his love? Can they see his patience or forgiveness, integrity? Am I reflecting his glory? And the third question, am I honoring God with every step? Everything that I do, am I honoring and bringing worship to him? So maybe, today you realize that you are walking your own path. Maybe today you realize that you never had that relationship with Jesus. Well, today's that day. Today's the day that you can start that walk with him. Maybe today you realize that you did have that walk, but somewhere along the way you kind of backslid. You kind of went back down into the valley. Well, today's that day you can come back to him. You can renew that walk. Today you are sitting here saying like, I walked that life. I keep walking with God. He is constantly with me. People see it in my life. The only thing I can tell you is then keep doing it. Keep walking the path. Keep praying and keep asking God, where do you want me to go next? When I turned to the ministry, I was scared as scared could be. I was nervous, did not know what God was calling me to do. I simply just put my yes out there and told him, so wherever you want me to go, I'll go. That's all that God requires of us, is to walk humbly with your God. Just to follow me, to listen to me, to obey me, and just walk. And don't turn away. So, so many of our lives, we live our lives in such a way that our families should be able to see what we truly are. We always have that 2 personalities, with our church family and with our family. And sometimes we even have a different side with our co-workers. All 3 of those sides should be pointing to God. All 3 of those sides should be saying, I have a relationship with Christ. I have a relationship with God. And no matter where I go, no matter what I do, is people seeing that? Is God with you? Let's pray. God, I just want to thank you for the love, the mercy, and the grace that you show us each and every day, even though that we don't deserve it. And Lord, I just pray that whoever here today, wherever they are at on their walk with you, that you just bring them closer to in line with you. That you just bring them closer to you so when they are walking, people can say like they did with Joseph, that they could see Christ in their life. That their life, that their footprints, that their trail constantly bring people closer to you. When people look at them, they can see you. They can see your light. They can see your glory. And Lord, I pray if there is someone here today that is burdened, let them come and lay their burdens on you. Let them come and know you before it's too late. In your name, amen.